Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today.
Friends, welcome back to the Ageless Athlete podcast, where we tap into secrets and stories of age defying, high performing athletes. A rainy weekend here in San Francisco, and I enjoyed spending the day putting this episode together, broken only by soggy walks outside with my dog Roger. Once in a while, you get exceedingly lucky and you get to meet your heroes and poke them with your fanciful questions. Dr. Mark Renneker is a legendary big wave surf icon from San Francisco. I learned to surf in the breaks around the city myself and could barely contain my excitement when Mark agreed to meet with me. Mark is 70 years young, started surfing at 11, and he has been exploring waves up and down the California coast for almost 60 remarkable years. As a surf pioneer, Mark holds many records to his name, but alongside, he juggles a career as a medical doctor and advocate. He was, first and foremost, maybe the only person to have surfed the infamous potato patch outside of the Golden Gate Bridge. He was also the first person to have led expeditions to discover surf in the Arctic, Antarctic regions, as well as Iceland, Norway, Greenland, and all of Alaska. We go deep here as we tap into many of Mark's routines that have forged his awe inspiring performance over the years. We talk about life balance, diet, training, and of course, the courageous yet nuanced risk taking in tackling some of the biggest waves on this planet. Hat tip to my friends Josh Weezy and Kevin Starr for helping get Mark on the show. Friends, if you enjoyed this show, please give us a follow and share this episode with just one friend. Hi, Mark. Good to have you here in person.
Glad to be with you, Kush.
Excellent. I see that it is nighttime in San Francisco with fall approaching. You feel ready?
I was ready for this fall season all through the summer and just kept hoping to see the first glimpse of fall weather and fall swells. And truth be told, here we are, October 20th, and we've only had a glimmer just in the past 2 days. And otherwise, it's chalk it up to global warming or what, but it's concerning. And the worst of it was that the water got so warm, it was over 60 degrees here in San Francisco beginning back in August. And there's this plankton bloom we call the red tide. And me and a lot of other surfers are intensely reactive to it, allergic. And boy, you'll see any number of folks out of water with any number of sort of sinus and nose and ear and eye problems. I saw a guy out in the water just 2 days ago. He had this goofy apparatus. It was like a clip on his nostrils. And he had some little thread or something that was going to keep this thing clipped onto his nose. And I said, is that because of the red tide? He goes, that's right. And I said, does that work, that thing you have on? And he said, I think it does. And I said, well, did you ever try just every time you're going to punch through or you're going to have your head underwater, just breathing out through your nostrils. And so the water can't come in. He said, oh. uh, but at any rate, yeah, this is not beginning in a really strongly positive way. Normally, by the end of September, we would have had a couple of days at Mavericks, a couple of solid double overhead days here at Ocean Beach. And instead, yesterday, the day before, maybe there was a handful of waves that were maybe double overhead, but for the most part, not. It still was classically Ocean Beach. Like yesterday, four of us, four good friends, all started paddling together up by Riviera. It was a 40-minute paddle out. And, if one were counting how many times you had to throw your board away or dive under or duck dive or whatever, it's in the hundreds. And one of the four didn't even make it. He finally just said, I'm out of here. And you know what? Of that whole session and the rides I got included, the most memorable part was the paddle out. And if there's something sort of the great equalizer here at Ocean Beach, but also the bar that you have to keep yourself healthy and strong enough for, it's to paddle out. And even in the summer, it can be a rough paddle out. But, famously at Ocean Beach, the fall, winter is what brings so many surfers to their knees. And they think they're the greatest surfer in the world, and they may well be. It doesn't mean that you're going to get out. And so you have to use a fair bit of cunning. One of the guys who I paddled out with, he is currently under treatment for an advanced melanoma.
Wow.
And he made it out. And when we got out there, I sort of jokingly paddled up to him as if I was like making a film from a drug company or something, and wanted to know, do I think that the drug that he's on, it's called Keytruda, do I think that contributed to his being able to get out? And he said, well, yes, I do think so. And we had sort of a joke about that. But I said, seriously, Tom, to get out on a day like today, or even on bigger days, it takes a certain willfulness. And do you feel that the will to get out on a day like today is somewhat similar to the will you've had to have to go through the cancer treatments? And he said, absolutely, absolutely. So there is a parallelism, I think, somewhat unique really to Ocean Beach, because most of the surfing world, there's nothing like this. For me, always, it was easy to go to the North Shore, and you could paddle out without getting your hair wet. It's a whole different deal.
You know what? This is such an interesting subject that I've thought about a lot in the last 10 years or so that I've been learning and surfing at Ocean Beach. Just so people understand where we are and what we do here, I would love to get a quick bio of yourself. How old are you? Where do you live? What do you do for work?
Yep. Good enough. So I'm 70 years old, and I grew up in West Los Angeles. And at age 11, with some friends, we did a junior lifeguard program right by Santa Monica Pier. And that was when I first began surfing. And I ended up going to UC Santa Cruz as an undergrad, and where I did my pre-med, and then got into UC San Francisco here for medical school. And that was in 1975, and was immediately astonished to see how big the surf was up here compared to Santa Cruz, which I thought was pretty big surf. And once I'd gotten to Santa Cruz, I was never intending to ever go back to Southern California, which has generally pretty small and very crowded surf. And for me, it was like heaven to find San Francisco. And all through medical school, I was never intending to even be a physician, really. I just wanted the education. I was more interested in actually the field of education. And through the passage of getting into medical school, I'd already been to like 8 different colleges or places of institutes, if you will, and had a number of important role models. A guy named Gregory Bateson, who was a legendary cultural anthropologist, a guy named Ivan Illich, who was sort of a priest,
Hmm.
and both of them having great, I don't know, great inspiration for me in terms of education and the power of that. And I was intending to actually go and work with a guy named Paulo Freire, who was
Hmm.
this whole notion of critical consciousness and ways to sort of educate people. And so my dream always was to use medicine as a way to create change
Hmm.
rather than as it were to sort of dole out medicines or do operations or that kind of thing. And it just so happened that when I was finishing medical school, I had an experience in family medicine with a guy named Ron Goldschmidt, and through him began to learn about this sort of the actual application of something I learned from Bateson in terms of the work of Milton Erickson, who was a amazing based on a change agent, but using hypnosis really.
Hmm.
And um, and I just loved what I was doing there, and that was at SF General, and so I applied to residency. It's the only place I even applied in family medicine at SF General, and did all that. And when I finished, I did inner city family medicine again, just sort of this whole idea of trying to work with people where you can really make profound change. And along the way, began realizing that it was advocacy that I was most interested in. And I started my own advocacy practice based on a television show of the time called I called it The Medical Equalizer, but there was a show called The Equalizer.
Hmm.
And it was made into movies and that kind of thing. But it was this idea of, you know, I'm going to say rescuing people, but pairing up with people to when they're feel like sort of everything is stacked against them. So I began doing that with patients who feel that the medical system had failed them utterly or had
Hmm.
given up on them or were actually obstructionistic. And I devised a way of working with people, never by Zoom, but by
Hmm.
phone. This was way back before people even talked about telephone medicine as something you could do. But I began doing it, in 1989, 90. And part of the sort of benefits of that was that mostly the people I would be speaking with, they were from all around the country, around the world. They'd find their way to me through an underground of people I'd already helped. And but they generally, the time to talk would be in the evening when they were
Sure.
done dealing with doctor appointments and whatever crazy stuff that they had to do with their lives. And also when more of their family members could be on the line and we would do like group calls. So I always was protecting my time for surf.
Hmm.
And I never was in the closet about being a hardcore surfer and a big wave rider. And the patients loved that. And it was fine with them if for whatever reason we did have a call set up and I needed to because there was a big swell or I needed to go to surf a swell somewhere. They were fine with, okay, yeah, that's great. You go surf and let's reschedule it. It was never an issue. And so I've been doing that work as the quote medical equalizer or what I call medical advocacy. I've
Sure.
been doing that for about 30 years. And I have a
Wow.
house right here on the beach.
Hmm.
And next to the house is another house that I have for just an office to do this work
Hmm.
out of.
Sure.
And I do a lot of teaching of medical advocacy to medical students and other physicians who want to study with me.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to explore a bit is how you've managed to organize your life so you can give surfing the time that surfing needs, as well as give your career the time that your patients and your profession needs. And I think I'm getting one clue right there, which is the work you have done with patient advocacy and being able to work with your patients to move times around by sharing with your clientele, your other life, your passion for surfing. It sounds like there's been adequate empathy on that front. I'm curious.
Now we have enough media out there, and people see people see surfing of all types. But generally, when I have talked about surfing, even in the last dozen years that I've been surfing, people's impressions of surf are still kind of locked into what they might have seen from movies. The image of a surfer in Waikiki Beach in Hawaii on a perfectly beautiful day. Have you been able to communicate how surfing in San Francisco might be a bit different than the popular stereotype? That's one. The second, how would you describe more to the average person how that is different? What makes surfing in San Francisco interesting and different and special?
So to the first question, there really isn't, when you're talking about stereotypes, it's usually maybe the stereotype that you hold yourself as virtually a chip on your own shoulder. And I've seen far too many professionals, lawyers, physicians, physicists, who, because they were a surfer, they were literally in the closet or slightly ashamed of it even. And so in the same way that people have stereotypes perhaps about what a physician should be, in a white coat and like something that you see on television or in a movie. But in truth, the same diversity that you'll see in medicine, you'll see in surfing. And yeah, there really are some stereotypical characters who become that way. Largely, they're the high visibility ones who are sponsored surfers who, they've got a gig and they got to perform and go to work and present whatever is the company's, what they're trying to sell. And I've developed literally almost an anaphylaxis to those characters. I mean, through these years of sort of combining medicine and surfing, I've gotten to know kind of most of the name people in the surfing world. And some of them are fantastic, and some of them, they're just doing it for a paycheck. And some of them hardly seem to enjoy surfing. And then they love to be when they can be a free surfer, they call it. And I remember one famous guy who said, well, now my sponsors are letting me be a free surfer. And I said, do you see the contradiction in what you're saying? They're letting you be a free surfer? What's that about? So the unique thing in San Francisco is that if you love, I mean to be pretentious, but if you love culture, that usually means being close to a city. And, I have a great avidity for jazz. I love seeing live jazz, and I must go to 2 or 3 shows a month and have for a long time. And I thrive on movies. I see a lot of movies. Okay. And in terms of keeping the balance, I remember I used to have an index of, I'd go down in the San Francisco Chronicle. They don't even have these lists anymore, but it'd be all the theaters and what they're showing. And I would do a tally of how many of the movies I'd seen. And I decided that if I hadn't seen at least 20 of the movies, and the total number would average around, in town, there might be a total of about 70, 75 movies. But if I hadn't seen at least 20 of them, it meant that I was working too hard. And then the other measure I began to use was, you can make money in medicine for sure. There's, you can take on more gigs and push for, charging more and all that kind of thing. But what I came to realize was the real power is in terms of buying free time. In other words, that I'm lucky to be a physician and I can make a lot of money if I need to, but it also means I can create a lot of free time. And so I've set it up so that I don't generally ever have an appointment before about 5 p.m. And because the summer surf is so crappy here, I will, do more work during the day and more appointments during the day, and I just work a lot more hours. And then I literally downshift in my schedule big time, starting right around now. And I'll keep that up through the big wave season, which for us goes right through February.
I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24 by 7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code Ageless15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code Ageless15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode.
Sounds like you've been able to create that schedule and hone it over the years to where you kind of have you have that balance and the flexibility. Yeah, curious. To the layperson, how would you describe or compare San Francisco surf to maybe other kinds of surf? And I'm not trying to put all other kinds of surf in one bucket, but if you were to make that distinction, how would you go about it?
Some people approach surfing from a quantitative perspective, how many waves they can catch. For instance, surfing in San Francisco is more of a qualitative experience, and big wave surfing in general is more of a qualitative experience. So that, on a big day out here in San Francisco, you feel like you've accomplished a lot just having made it outside. And B, if you end up catching more than 2 or 3 waves, you caught a lot of waves that day. And so a lot of people who would stand and watch surfers, for instance, they're sort of puzzled how little time we actually spend riding waves, but how much time we have to spend sort of working out all the angles, as it were, to figure out where to sit and where to take off and how not to wipe out. And the higher you go up the ladder of big wave surfing, always the fewer the waves you'll be catching. So on big days at Mavericks, Mavericks doesn't even start breaking until it's at least triple overhead. So let's say 15, 18-foot faces. Very few people catch many waves. Even when there's nobody out. I mean, I surf a lot by myself, at Mavericks included. And you're not doing it for how many you catch, and you might even be out there for 3 or 4 hours and catch one wave. And from a sort of a spiritual tradition, it's just about perfect.
What makes it perfect?
It's the oneness of it. It's the fact that you imagine that you have some measure of control over it all, but for the most part you don't, other than by your own experience and fitness and cunning. And a lot of it is cunning, but having to put aside. It's like people who now will say, well, I'm done with this COVID pandemic. I'm just going to live my life regularly. The foolishness of that, to imagine that you can proclaim that and and that there's any reality to that. And the same with somebody who's going to conquer the surfs or, take surf lessons. And then I got a coach and then they, this and that and blah, blah, blah. And we watch these people come to Mavericks thinking they're these conquering heroes because they've done that elsewhere and maybe in other aspects of their life, and they're just reduced to rubble.
Sure. Mark, how long have you been surfing Ocean Beach and Mavericks? And maybe if you can just give a quick idea of how you've seen the surf culture evolve over that time.
So I started when I came up here to start medical school, and I was looking around for a place to live. And it was, offshore. It's this time of year and sunny, and there were good surf, and there was nobody else even in the water. And I was getting some great waves. And there was one guy a ways up the beach, and I paddled up to where he was and said, what do you call this spot right here? And he said, oh, this is called Pillbox, and that's called Purple Cow, and all these things he starts saying. He goes, are you new here? And I said, yeah, I just moved up here to start medical school. And he paddled over right up next to me, and he put out his hand, and he said, "Dan Suey, third year." And
Funny.
so it was like, that was more important than any white coat ceremony, sort of for the initiation of becoming sort of in this group. And right away, all the surfboards I'd had from, LA area and Santa Cruz were useless up here. And I gradually began to realize I had to get bigger guns, bigger, longer boards, which you couldn't even get here. I mean, there weren't shapers for the most part. And even in Santa Cruz, they didn't have big boards. So for whatever reason, I began going to the North Shore when the surf here would get crappy, which is usually in February. And there they'd still have big waves, and most of the pros had left town. And they often would leave behind their big guns. So I would just buy a pile of them and fly them back home, 5 or 6 boards even. And the problem here was we were just breaking boards all the time because of how powerful the surf is. And also is when leashes were really pretty primitive. I mean, the leashes would just break willy-nilly. My goal was really to surf a place that breaks about 3 to 4 miles out called the Potato Patch, which I had seen the first time in anatomy lab on the 14th floor of the medical school. You could see the Potato Patch breaking. It would just blow my mind. And these were waves that were 50-foot faces, something like that. I mean, really, and some of the waves would go on for like a minute. And so I kept...
And Mark, this is just, if you don't mind describing this place, it's a fascinating natural phenomena, right? I believe it's outside the Golden Gate Bridge.
If you just think of like a river mouth where the sand comes out the river and deposits sandbars, that's really what San Francisco Bay is. It's just one big river mouth, and all the sand goes out in a horseshoe crown that stretches from the north on the Marin side all the way down here, comes in kind of closer here down by Terabelle Street. And in the outer realm of it is where the shipping channel has to be dredged for the big ships to come in. It's about 4 fathoms deep, so about 24 feet deep. And the only way to access it, originally I tried by a friend who had a power boat, and I ended up worrying more about the guy in the boat, and I didn't like doing that. And so then I just began trying to paddle out to it. And after a number of experiments, figured out that on an outgoing tide, I could just jump in up by the cliff house and literally ride the current all the way out without paddling even. It was hilarious. You could just sit on your board and it just takes you 2 to 3 knots an hour. I mean, it was easy. You just had to time it for when the tide stopped outgoing, because otherwise you couldn't stay in position out there. But on some of those days where I wouldn't even catch a wave, I might have literally paddled or covered maybe 10 or 12 miles. And I always liked paddling. Paddling seemed to me a delight, and sometimes, the current would help too. And then finally, and I would do this with friends in the beginning. And again, I hate to say this, but they would kind of chicken out or lose heart, or, and I would say, no, we got to get about another mile or 2 further out. We're just on the inside here. And they would go, no, I don't know. And then the Coast Guard would send out one of their rescue boats, because there were some reports, and those guys, you've seen them on the big days here. They bust through the waves and make quite a show for people. And then they would look over and they'd go, "Oh, it's you, Doc. Oh, okay, no problem." And then they would just disappear. And finally, I ended up doing it by myself and caught a wave. This was about 2005. That solid 25-foot wave, and it rode it for about a minute, and with no photographers, no other people there, and that was just the way I like it.
That's beautiful. The few times when I have been fortunate to be out in the water by myself and catch a wave like that, not a wave like that, but a wave, much more humble in its dimensions, it's still been an outstanding moment for me. So I think I can only imagine what it must be like to be out there and having not only caught that wave, but put in the effort and time to earn that wave, which I think is a big part of what surfing is.
Well, for me, though, I must say a lot of it has been, again, really interwoven with the same process that I use in medicine of seemingly something unsolvable, someone with an advanced, metastatic cancer or something. So what's the way out of it? What can you do differently? And, or additionally, and so it's a lot of research. And so these places that I'll go and surf, it's incremental in the study that I engage in. Often a lot of cartography and bathymetrics and oceanic kind of inquiries, and talking to people who know areas, whether they be fishermen or whether they be researchers, to get a better handle on it. And so I've taken that level of exploration or inquiry into not just the local area here, but I've been systematically exploring the Arctic and the Antarctic and the subarctic, subantarctic areas, and have organized and led first expeditions to surf Antarctica, Iceland, northern Norway, Svalbard, Greenland, all of Alaska. And what I'm most excited about now is I'm putting together a trip to explore all the way to the end of the Aleutian Islands. It'll be like a month-long trip next August.
Holy smokes, that sounds incredible.
Amongst all those trips and all the memorable surf sessions over the decades, including the one where you caught that eponymous wave at the Potato Patch, any other highlights or proud moments, maybe a couple that stand out that you would like to share?
I have a wave that I surf some hours north from here. I have a little 10 by 12 foot cabin, no electricity, on a cliff over a surf break. And then it looks out over way out in the ocean, an outer reef spot that I first surfed in 85, 86. And it remains my favorite big wave spot in the world. And I've managed to keep it a secret for the most part and not let what befell Mavericks happen to it. And so I've had experiences out there that just would blow anyone's mind. And usually surfing alone, about a mile from shore. And the one that most comes to mind actually is, again, the lessons of hubris are critical to me. And so I had paddled out alone on a 10-9 brand new board that Jeff Clark made me. And it was, 20 to 25 foot, something like that. So that would be like 4 to 6 times overhead. And
wow.
And when I do this on my own to these outer reef spots, I promise myself I'll only take 3 waves. And the first wave, it'll be an easy one. I'm not going to say shoulder hop, but sort of. And the goal is to try and do it without getting my hair wet.
Okay.
Because again, it's not like Ocean Beach where you got to dive through the whitewater. These are places you can access through relatively calm water. It can take 45 minutes or an hour to paddle out. And then the third wave would be the only one that I would really kind of take a chance and sort of sit deeper, maybe a bigger wave, whatever. And so I'd already caught my first 2 waves. And then this fog bank appeared. And it happened so fast. It was like a bad special effect in a movie or something, but literally no visibility. And I don't know, 50 feet, something like that. And so I have my lineups out there based on way on shore sort of areas that I triangulate and figure out where I am and to where the wave would break. But I also know the kelp bed pretty well and the boils pretty well. And I said, okay, I know where I'm sitting. I'll just wait for the fog to lift because I really want to get that third wave. And, it was kind of amazing because as soon as I sort of had convinced myself that I would get a third wave, this giant wave broke outside of me. I didn't even see it coming. We're talking huge, huge wave. Throw your board away, dive as deep as you can. The leash breaks.
Oh, goodness.
It's one of those things where it's so violent that it sort of launches you back up from the depths like a torpedo shooting out of the water or something. And I go, oh man, this will be a challenge. And I just looked at my watch. It was 3:47. I remember exactly. And I thought, there's time. It was dead of winter, so it was going to turn dark at 5.
Mm.
And I wasn't really worried about swimming in. I've practiced swimming in out there before. It's really tricky to swim in. You have to swim in through these rocks, and we call it the keyhole, and it's formidable. But really what I was worried was to find my new board. And I have a pretty good idea where the boards go from having happened before, but never in the dense fog. And part of it was that you had to stay with where the waves were breaking, because that's where the board would go, which meant that you had to let these still giant waves just you. And I did all of the above and was swimming around out in the ocean again, about a mile offshore, looking for my board in the fog, and never found it.
Okay.
And then finally swam in, and my car was parked pretty far away. And so I'm running along the road with my broken leash. And now the sun's come out. Now I can see everything. And all I want to do is get binoculars so I can look for it. And some guy driving by who recognizes me, he says, "Doc, what are you doing?" I said, "I just lost my board." And he goes, "You were fucking out there?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Could you help me find my board?" And he said, yeah, great. So he's got binoculars too. And so we stood on the cliff and just watched and watched and watched. Never found the board, turned dark, and that was the end of the day.
Golly, that's quite a story. That was not what I expected. Quite the adventure you had out there, and did not expect the ending. And it brings together so many elements of surfing that many of us experience. You just have experienced that on a much more intense and grander scale, but it brings together the highs and the lows and the chases and the losses and the elements out in nature. Oh, and sorry about that board. A brand new board from Jeff Clark indeed sounds quite special.
I had a board, one of my favorite boards. It's still one of my favorite boards. I still ride it. That Dave Parmenter made me. It was an 8-foot fish that he made me for Mavericks. Worked fantastically well at Mavericks. One day the leash broke and I swam and looked for it and never found it. Let the harbor master know that if anybody with a fishing boat or whatever found a board, bit of a sort of purple red one, to call me. A month goes by, he calls. I think we've got your board. And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, one of the captains, he found this board floating out in the ocean. He just wants to, make sure that it's yours." And I said, "Well," and I described some, as it were, sort of like in the, police procedural, identifying tattoos or scars. I said, "Yeah, there's a ding here and there's a blah, 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 and this and that." He goes, "Yeah, it sounds like your board." And I said, "Well, what do I have to do to get it back?" He goes, "Well, you know the rules about recovery at sea." And I said, "Oh, that's fine. If he wants some money, I'm happy to pay him. I really love that board." And I said, "How much does he want?" He goes, "A C note." I said, "A C note? Did he say a C note?" And he said, "Yep." And I don't know if you even know what a C note is.
I do not.
Well, it's gangster slang for $100 bill.
Oh, century note. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I said to him, "God, this guy is an authentic captain." And he said, "Yeah, just bring me a C note." So I had to go to the bank, get a C note, went down there and got my board back.
That's hilarious. That's it could have been a C note wrapped around a bottle of rum or something to make it even more.
I could have, yeah.
That's crazy. Mark, you've been surfing you've been surfing for such a long time at such a high level. How do you keep your body? How do you stay in shape? Do you cross train? Do you have any other rituals? Any dietary habits that you have refined over the years?
Friends, it means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing, it's all me, trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just get you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this.
Yeah, and it's been just like everything else in surfing and medicine, it's been incremental. So I've been surfing for 60 years. Started when I was, 10 or 11 thereabouts. And what I didn't want was to do anything that would interfere with surfing. So I was a hardcore skateboarder, pretty radical skateboarder. But I kept getting injured, and then I couldn't surf, and I hated that. So I gave up that. I gave up skiing. I used to do rock climbing, and surfers generally make good rock climbers. The problem is that if you fall surfing, it's no big deal. The water's soft. But I had some good falls, and I thought, this is stupid. I'm not going to do that. I won't be able to surf. And so that was like one rule of thumb. The second was I had learned yoga early on and always kept up some practice of yoga or certain poses that I knew would help me not have sort of stiffness or loss of flexibility. And also, I began working with different people like a cranial osteopath, in other words, a treating manual medicine specialist. And with my stated goal being, I want you to keep me able to surf as I get older. And so just a standing appointment once a month, and it's just proactive. It's just looking for restrictions or issues that, if left unattended or worked on, could really add up to a problem. And then amidst that, then invariably there are injuries that happen. And I have about 4 different people of different specialties. One is an Atlas orthogonal chiropractor who only adjusts just the Atlas. Another is a brilliant, you would call it a sort of a muscle specialist, but he did a lot of dance medicine and took care of Marishnikov, and developed a lot of his own style of working with people to look for restrictions, at different segments of the spine and the hip and ankles and all of that. And I've worked with him a lot to help sort of reverse or improve like a scoliosis that I've had, and work with things of ergonomics and posture. So I've had acupuncturists, and these are people who have helped me, I would say, age well and understand and mainly work with people who are motivated like I am, dancers and athletes and the like. And without that, not to say that it's victim blaming, but I can't tell you how many friends I have who've had hip replacements and knee replacements and how many shoulder surgeries and neck fusions. And you just see it gradually take its toll for what they can do in surfing as they've gotten older. And my role model has always been Jerry Lopez. And Jerry I knew from, I was in a movie with him called Riding Giants in 2004.
Sure.
And he wrote a foreword for a book I did on surfers' health called Surf Survival, now in its 2nd edition. But the essence of Lopez's teachings, if you will, is surf today to surf tomorrow. So it's pretty obvious. So you see these guys come out, they're just crash and burn artists on big days at Mavericks, and they get hurt. They just get hurt. And, my goal is to literally never fall, not wipe out once. I remember I went an entire winter without a single wipeout. What that means is you don't catch all the waves you want. It means that, if you don't think there's at least a 90% probability of making the wave, not to go. It also means getting really good equipment. I know this is a big deal in other sports, maybe more so than in surfing, but I've always had wonderful shapers to work with and who make me a lot of experimental boards and interesting designs. And, even just 2 days ago, I got to ride a board that just blew my mind. It's what's called an edge board. I never felt such a board under my feet before. It's quite invigorating to suddenly, think that you've seen it all and seen every idea and hear something completely new.
That's amazing. Wow.
And in terms of nutrition,
yeah,
all through medical school and even for a long time thereafter, I used to have a hamburger every day.
Okay.
And I have found that I could study medicine or, for medical school best sort of sitting at a restaurant. I used to go to Bill's Place over on Clement Street. And I'd sit in the back there, and they just loved taking care of me, the medical student. And they would bring me all kinds of treats and things. I was never good at like studying in a library or something like that. At some point, I did herniate a disc. And one of the things that I began to explore was, okay, maybe I'll become, vegetarian or pescarian. And that was in about 1990. I've been essentially that since. I gave up chicken and pork and turkey and, all the red meats for sure. And it's interesting, the one time I slipped, as it were, was in the Antarctica trip. The captain owned an island in the Falklands where he would raise his own lambs, and he had all this frozen lamb. And, there is something wonderful about lamb. There just is, and so I got ill from eating lamb again after about 2 days. And that was in the year 2000 when we did that trip. I haven't had red meat since.
Sure. Got it. Pescatarian, almost completely vegetarian. Any supplements?
Yeah, actually there are. I'm a believer in N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, which is, when you swallow it, it's a prodrug for what's called glutathione. Glutathione is the chemical that a huge number of cells in your body produce as a way of cleansing the organs. To give you an example, NAC, if you go mushroom collecting with the next rain up the coast, and you pick the wrong mushroom and eat it, and your liver's being destroyed, and you're, orange as a pumpkin, and you present to the emergency room, the very first therapy they would give you would be intravenous NAC. In other words, to save your liver. So NAC is something that cleanses the organs, including the kidneys, including the lungs, including the heart, including the brain. I've always taken additional amounts of vitamin D, on the order of about like 5,000 units a day. I've always liked magnesium. Take some extra magnesium. And then a friend of mine who's a nutritional oncologist, who is in the Chicago area, and he's a surfer also. He actually went on the Antarctica trip, and he and I surf Lake Michigan and places like that together.
Sure.
But he has these supplements that he's put together that are sort of a gamish of, 15 or 20 things that would sort of be everything you might find at Whole Foods. And I've always taken some of that.
Okay.
Oh, a little bit of curcumin, a little bit of fish oil, but not too much. If these things cause you to bleed, I did find for a while I was taking sort of preventative low dose or, baby aspirin. But boy, I just found, even like punching through a lip, I would get these little, ecchymoses, little, sort of bleeds under the skin on my face. So I cut that out.
Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together, training, aging, mindset, and all, you will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
I don't take any supplements. I'm 44, and I sometimes don't even know where to get started. It seems there's so much variety and so many types, and then there are also the snake oil sales people out there peddling their own multi potions. I will have to put in more research.
The research gets very easy. There's a branch of integrative medicine called functional medicine.
Sure.
The principle of it is that you look for biomarkers. And if you want to not shotgun with supplements, so biomarkers would be, looking at micronutrient levels in the blood, looking at vitamin levels in the blood, looking at inflammatory markers, coagulation markers, immune function. All of these things are easily done. And what's really interesting now in the field of health is that there's a lot of direct-to-consumer ability of ordering all the lab tests that you otherwise would have to depend on physicians for. So you can go to like direct.com and you can order virtually anything that a physician would order. And if you want to, play around and look online under what I would call terrain panel. So you want to look at not the disease qualities of one's body, but the terrain, meaning the healthy part of your body. And you look at where the normal levels would be for you name it, magnesium or C-reactive protein or things of that nature, and then all the different antioxidants and all that, and then you would say, oh gosh, I'm below normal. I don't know why that is, but I'll start taking such and such, more zinc. And then in 3 months, I'll recheck that on that dose of zinc and see if I'm hitting the level that I want, some optimal level, ideally on the upper range of normal.
Got it.
And at least then, you're not shotgunning. You're actually working with your own physiology from a standpoint of knowledge.
Yeah, I know that is very sanguine advice. Somebody else recommended functional medicine to me for just the same sort of concerns I had about shooting in the dark. And I think, thank you for reinforcing that.
Well, and the other thing to say in the field of sports medicine, again, they tend to be evidence-based, but they tend to be more data-driven. Mm-hmm. And so, you can get a lot of good data in terms of exercise physiology and sports medicine, or in terms of physiatry or physical therapy, degrees of motion, even just resting tension in the body. These can be measured. And that's what the elite athletes are working with, whether they be swimmers or rock climbers or what have you. A lot of them, they get to that level by at some point kind of going into, as it were, the biomarkers or the science of that which they're endeavoring to do. All those guys on the Warriors?
Yes.
They know their numbers.
Oh, wow. Okay. Got it.
And all the rest of us are farting around.
Got it. I mean, no, there's no doubt that those sports that have a lot of money in them, those sports have certainly embraced a lot of science. And I think sports like ours, and obviously I'm not like an athlete of that caliber. I think the rest of us kind of have to just take that lead and learn from people who are doing those things and not reinvent the proverbial. So no, I think you're right.
No, the goal is to reinvent the wheel. In other words, to learn something often is for you to learn it the first time. Somebody else may have learned it, but for whatever reason, it never transferred into your realm.
Right.
You can cognitively or intellectually understand it.
Sure.
But, and I think it does help when you, even, maybe this is the ultimate purpose of your series, is trying on these other strategies of other people and see what fits for you. And that's, of course, that's how we all go through life.
I think that's exactly right. I think it starts with like the cognition and then maybe moves on to, the willingness to take a chance. and put the resources towards it, and then ultimately figure out through experimentation what isn't that works the best, and then kind of customize. Few things you excel at. What is one thing that you wish you were good at that you're not?
There was a guy from Australia who would come to Mavericks every year named Tony Ray. Tony Ray could paddle faster than anyone I had ever seen. And I really would watch him and watch how he would use his arms and how deep he would put his hands into the water and how thick his board was. And it isn't that I obsess about paddling faster, but in answer to your question, I would like to paddle faster. And also what I see among my peers, meaning surfers of my age, is that they begin to not be able to paddle as fast. And consequently, they end up taking off later, and they end up falling or not being able to stand on their board properly, because the principal deficit being paddling speed. So a lot of you can make up for in terms of loss of speed of going to lower rocker planes, so flatter boards. So like a fish fundamentally is a flatter rocker plane. And they just paddle a hell of a lot better. They just do. I consciously work with that as something to improve upon, if you will.
Got it. And I don't think you're any slouch when it comes to paddling, but I can see that. When you look at all your other gifts with the sport, maybe that's the one that you would like to.
No, but also I would tell you, honestly, it is the one that I would notice as I've gotten older. The paddling speed just drops off a little bit. I can sprint paddle the same.
Yeah.
But in doing some of these sort of heroic paddles, if you will, these hour-long paddles or whatever, they take longer. And if I'm paddling with a younger friend or someone who's a great paddler, like Grant Washburn, who I surf with a lot, another big wave rider, Grant, he just paddles faster than all of us. And how much faster? I don't know, 5%, 10% maybe. But in big wave surfing, that's everything. Just small percentage increments make a big difference.
I think it adds up over a long session, a long paddle. That little bit of extra speed and capacity probably has a huge impact on one's performance. Maybe in the last 5 or 10 years, any new behavior, any new habit you find has most improved your life?
I would say I just have an ever-improving bullshit detector. I don't suffer fools gladly. I just don't. I don't waste a lot of time with people who, I don't know this can be a glib answer when people would say, what are you afraid of? What I'm afraid of is superficiality. I like depth. I like complexity. I like the unknown. But if it's just whatever, small talk, in a sense, I prefer my own company, actually, or friends I have who are really rigorous and engaged.
How does that translate to any new maybe behavior?
Yeah, it does. A degree of intolerance.
Sure.
I've not to say that there's a long line of people wanting to engage me as a person. It's a months-long wait to work with me. It's like a 6-month wait at this point. It's embarrassing even, especially for people with life-threatening illness. But I don't. It's hard. I didn't make it very hard for you to get in touch with me just because I had a friend in common. But I don't have a website. I don't make it easy for people to get to me. I just don't. By and large, writers and people want to do articles and stuff. I don't bother with them at all. I've learned the hard way that way. I mean, it isn't what it is. I'm not interested in that.
Fair.
Your proposal, I liked the idea of, as it were, what it is to age gracefully or to be healthy as you get older as a surfer.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
That's a wonderful topic.
I think it is, and I think this conversation shall hopefully benefit a lot of people in a material way. Here's another kind of interesting question. Do you love your future or your past more?
Well, the future doesn't exist, and The past, as we're learning, is more or less a matter of interpretation or opinion, or sort of the Rashomon effect. So all there is the present. And so, I don't worry about my past, really. I've kept a log or a journal basically since I was 16. And I do have a lot of writings, if you will, but I'm all about what's happening right now.
That's a great answer. Now is the only dimension we have in front of us that we have the highest ability to influence.
Well, that, and I mean, really, when you study spiritual traditions, they all arrive at that same viewpoint. It's only about the now.
Yes.
Yeah, you're supposed to take lessons from the past.
Sure.
But it's to the degree to which you can apply them, it has to do to yourself, not to others.
Do you have a meditation practice, Mark?
Surfing. There was one great book written by a guy named Kent Pearson, who was an Australian sociologist, and I was interested in his work. He had died. And at one point I went specifically to see his widow in Australia because I wanted to see his papers. I was really interested in his writings. And what he did was he did studies of trying to understand why people surf. These were in-depth studies. I mean, PhD level. Australians take this stuff seriously.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even in as many words as this. It was, what's the principal reason why you surf? And it was to do with its meditative properties. And again, all that time that we spent sitting around out there in the water, that strange feeling of things sort of washing away that you had been tussling with in your mind and trying to figure out with the problems with whomever and whatever, and like forwarding this and that and bills and the future. The future only becomes this really, really wonderful childish thing of believing that there's going to be a great wave that's going to come to you in the next few moments. And that is its own meditation.
Fair enough. I would agree that ultimately for me, and I think for many of us, I think sports assume a meditation quality when we find that flow, and allows us to be that much more present and that heightened perception and all of those things that come with that state. And I think that's probably what I enjoy the most about them.
One of the ways I proceed in my medical advocacy practice is I only take on one new case a week. I don't treat them. I don't prescribe things to them. I help them figure out things that they can do, set them up to sort of embark on a different course with their illness. And so I often, in my dreams even, but also when I'm out in the water, the solution to a case will come to me when I'm not specifically looking for it.
Fair. Yeah.
And that becomes something that I can't deliberately create in the water, but it happens when, I don't know, maybe it's pretty inconsistent and there's just some ray of light over some body of kelp or something, and then boom, there it is. And I know exactly what I need to do on a given case. I don't have to write it down or anything else. It's so evident, I'll remember it. That's happened so many times. And when it doesn't happen is when I've taken on too many cases, too much work. These problems of others that I'm trying to help them solve, they become something encumbering to me. Then sometimes for many people who surf, they're trying to leave the land, on the beach, as it were. I've actually, in the balance, if you will, tried to make it so that I don't mind carrying some of the people I'm trying to help with me when I go out, especially on these fairly complex, difficult expeditions to the outer realm or what have you, because so often what I'm going through is what they're going through, trying to make something happen in the most unlikely conditions imaginable. In 20 and 30 foot surf, there's nobody else who even wanted to go out. They didn't even want to deal with it. And it can be, horrific winds or something. And I'm just trying to figure out, is it possible to go out and actually get a ride?
Sure. I'm going to do a crazy segue here. Question I want to ask you, that surfing the waters at Ocean Beach probably more than most people out there. Even myself, in my whatever decade-long span at the beach, I've seen some pretty interesting marine life. When I tell people that I've seen dolphins out there, just that part, I think dolphins and the occasional whale out there, people get pretty astonished. So curious, what has been some of the most interesting wildlife that you might have seen in the water, and if you have also ever seen the man in the gray suit, so to speak.
I've had one encounter with a great white at a sort of remote spot south of here, again right in peak great white season, and it was profound. It was close to me, and it was telling me I'm here. It was
Wow.
it came up out of the water about 15 feet away from me, but it first appeared as just a dome of water being lifted, and when it was about 2 feet high, then I saw the pectoral fin just slicing through it, and it was elegant. It was elegant how it sliced through, and then the head emerged on the other end of the dome, literally with the eye looking at me. And it was just, it was checking me out. It was territorial. The place where we were is, it's a seal rookery. So what do you expect? Shit, But in all these years I've been surfing there, I've never had such an encounter. Right away, it was okay. Evermore for about that June through end of September, early October, I'm not going to surf there again. And I've held to that pretty rigorously. The other most profound experience was I was out with one friend on a big day at Mavericks, and it was getting into the spring, so February, March, something like that. And this friend says, "Doc, there's a whale going to ram us. And it's coming up from the south. It's a giant gray whale, whatever, 60 feet or something. It's not doing the diving thing underneath or porpoising kind of thing. It's just streaming across the surface. And it's, I don't know, 75 feet away or something, heading right at us as a set came.
Oh.
And I was exactly in position to take off. And I just wanted to get out of the way. And so I took off on this wave, and I'm on like a 10.5-foot board or something. And as I'm dropping in, the whale's back was in the trough in front of me.
Whoa.
And so I had to fade deep around the whale, which I made the fade, I made the bottom turn, rode the wave, I came back out, and my friend is sitting there white, because the whale, after it had done that, it had then breached through the back of the wave and came down, landing, exploding right next to him, just feet from him, and then just kept on his way.
Gosh, that's that's a remarkable thing to happen in the water. Sounds like both of you came out unscathed, only with
and we frequently
profound memories.
Recreate the memory of it. Yeah. You remember that time? Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's awesome, Mark. Just some fun questions. You talked about your food habits before, but if you had to, eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would that be?
That's easy. I've done 3 long trips to Japan, especially to the northern island, Hokkaido. Found some amazing big waves there. I could eat Japanese food 3 meals a day and be utterly happy.
It's funny, when I spoke to our common friend, Kevin Starr, recently, guess what his response was? Similar. Yes.
Yeah.
Mark, I know you love movies. What's a favorite movie you could watch again and again?
I worship Buster Keaton, and I never tire of watching Keaton's films. And during the pandemic, even, it was probably the thing I missed the most. We're seeing those kinds of repertory or silent films and special showings. And I love Kurosawa's films from Japan.
Okay,
and,
sure.
And I miss those too, for better or for worse. Just love really bad, dumb movies. And I've always loved horror films, always.
Okay.
And fortunately, there's no shortage of good, bad horror films. So I put in a fair bit of time with them.
Excellent. If there was a big billboard out there and you wanted to leave a message for people out there, what would it say?
Huh?
Okay.
I mean, the master, Jordan Peele is the master now of the short title. He hasn't done one called but
Okay.
he'll get there.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mean, and part of that reflects, I can't help but come down to earth on, it's disappointing, the issues of truth in America. When I hear the bullshit, if you will, my reply is huh? It's like, what? Huh? No.
Yeah, I love it.
Or Jordan Peele would say nope. Same difference.
Same. Okay, so Billboard one would be and maybe if there was a choice for a second one, that would be nope. And I love both.
But nope's already taken. That's just that.
Have to be like the most original or exclusive one, maybe just the one, one that resonates with you. I think on that note of nope, it's been most excellent conversation.
Alrighty, Kush.
Wow, how inspiring is Mark? Tenacious, skilled, and meticulous in his approach in seeking adventure of the highest caliber. At 70, he is still chasing monster waves with the best of them, with an approach honed over decades of hard work and awareness. My jaw is still dropped from some of his stories. I came out inspired and wanting to double down on my own physio before the next season arrives. Thanks for tuning in, friends. Hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did. Please give us a follow. Until next time, stay ageless.
Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through prior episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week. And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.